Let's turn in our Bibles to Romans 11:33. Romans 11:33. Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments, and his ways past finding out. Amen. May the Lord bless the reading of his word. Well, life has some humorous mysteries. Like, how come the word abbreviation is such a long word? And if it's 0 degrees outside today and it's supposed to be twice as cold tomorrow, how cold is it going to be? And how do you press hard? Why do we press harder on a remote control when we know that the battery is dead? And why are they called apartments when they're all stuck together? Shouldn't they be togetherness? When two airplanes almost collide, why do they call it a near miss? It sounds like to me it was a near hit. And why are there 5 syllables in the word monosyllabic, which means one syllable? That's what that word means. And it's got 5 syllables. And have you ever wondered this? Why was it that Tarzan in those movies never had a beard? And if a book about failures doesn't sell, does that make it a success? And should vegetarians eat animal crackers? These are deep mysteries. Someone said, I went to a bookstore and asked the saleswoman, where's the self-help section? She said she couldn't help me because if she told me, it would defeat the purpose of having a self-help section. So now that we've got those mysteries out of the way, there are some serious mysteries in life. But I read about a mysterious meeting between President Herbert Hoover and the famous Polish pianist Ignacy Paderewski, which I thought was famous. I even thought I recognized the name, but nobody else seems to. But he really was a famous pianist. I found this record of the event in the National Archives. So this is something that's verified. This isn't. You know, so many times.
Yeah, that's it.
Yes, you got it. Good. So many times you hear things, and I have made it my habit, especially in the last few years, that when I see something and it's a good illustration, I check it out because I like to know the facts, and I don't. Sometimes things get told and then they get retold, and they add something and they subtract a little bit, and it changes as you go by. And I think I'll turn off my ringer.
That was me.
Oh, that was you? Oh, well, I still had mine on. I think it was me. We'll blame each other. How's that?
That was you, but I sent you a thumbs up.
Oh! Isn't technology great?
That was me.
Well, this is real life at Crusaders Church. This is the way we thought. Well, anyway, this was recorded in the National Archives, and here's the story. Mrs. Hoover recalled the incident between Herbert Hoover and the famous pianist Ignacy Paderewski that took place in 1896 at Stanford University. She also remembers being amused discussing it with Paderewski and Mr. Hoover over 40 years after it had happened. And here's Mrs. Hoover's report. She said, back in 1896, Herbert was a student at Stanford, and Paderewski was an aspiring touring pianist. There was no faculty or student body organization to bring outside lecturers or musicians to the campus and to the college town, so Herbert Hoover, with 2 or 3 friends of his, frequently arranged for outside lecturers and musicians to come to the campus. And they approached the advanced agent of Paderewski and booked an engagement some months later. But when making that booking, they had failed to realize that they had scheduled Paderewski for the middle of Easter vacation. When he arrived, there were practically no students or faculty on campus, and the a new college town, was so small that only a few dozen music lovers turned out for the concert of the great pianist. That evening before the concert, the young men asked to see Mr. Paderewski, and they explained their dilemma. And they had what meager cash they were able to receive in hand and were ready to turn it over to him, assuring Paderewski that they would forward the balance to him within weeks if he gave them his forwarding address, because whenever you book someone famous like that, you have a certain guarantee that you have to provide so much money. Well, with the great interest, Paderewski asked the details of their arrangements, and then he took out of the small amount of cash that they had, far less than they owed him. He took out what it cost him for the traveling expense of himself, the accompanist, and the other players of his party from San Francisco to the campus and back. And then he took a $100 bill and, smiling, said something to the effect of that he would take the $100 for his fee, and that they could keep the rest of what was left as a reward for their hard work, with a reminder that they should look at the college calendar before scheduling future events. Well, years passed, and Paderewski actually became the premier of Poland following World War I. And thousands of Paderewski's countrymen were starving. And Herbert Hoover had become the head of the U.S. Food and Relief Bureau. And as soon as the enemy armies were driven out of the country, Mr. Hoover's commission took charge of feeding the almost starving population of Poland, along with the starving population of Belgium. Numerous shiploads of food over several months were necessary, and Paderewski and the officials of Poland had taken part in making the plans. Paderewski and Mr. Hoover would meet again. After one of their early conferences, Mr. Hoover reminded Paderewski of their encounter years before. And they chuckled, recalling the event and how strange it was that they were brought together again under these circumstances. Now, there is some debate about the exact details of that first meeting at Stanford, the dollar amounts and some of that type of thing. But Herbert Hoover and Paderewski make only passing mention of it in their meetings, of that meeting in their memoirs. But there is no debate about the importance and the meaning of America's help in post-World War I Poland and Belgium, and the part that these two men played, that God brought together again mysteriously. So the story is worth remembering and repeating. It's kind of an example of the way that life's events so often point to the handiwork of God in the matters that may seem common and ordinary, in the ways that things have happened to us, the mysterious way that God works. We may refer to a chance meeting or some unlikely circumstance. We may refer to some strange coincidence, some unimagined turnabout in events, and we call them mysteries. and we witness an unlikely and an unexpected event, we're likely to repeat that verse in the Bible which says, God works in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. But would you be surprised to know that that isn't a verse in the Bible? It's a phrase that comes from the first line of the hymn entitled God Moves in a Mysterious Way, written in 1773 by the English poet William Cowper. It was first written by Cowper as a poem entitled Light Shining Out of Darkness. And that was the hymn that we sang this morning. But here are the words that Cowper wrote. God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps on the sea and rides upon the storm. Deep in the dark and hidden mines, the net with never failing skill, he fashions all his bright designs and works his sovereign will. Oh, fearful saints, new courage take. The clouds that you now dread are breaking with mercy and will break in blessings on your head. Judge not the Lord by feeble sense, but trust him for his grace. Behind the frowning providence, he hides a smiling face. And this is the third verse. I think it may be my favorite. God's purpose will ripen fast, unfolding every hour. The bud may have a bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower. Blind unbelief is sure to err and scan his work in vain. God is his own interpreter, and he will make it plain. So God, we trust in you. Oh God, we trust in you. When tears are great and comforts few, we hope in mercies ever new. We trust in you. Well, the Bible is also full of stories that tell about the mysterious workings of God. I think of stories like Joseph being sold into slavery and then saving the lives of his brothers who sold him. I think of Joseph, and it's chock full of other incidents, incident after incident. He was sold into slavery by his brothers, wrongly accused of rape, imprisoned before God, imprisoned before God made his dream a reality. And all these things work together for good. P.S. You can find that in the Bible. That's in Romans 8:28. All things work together for good. But imagine how shocked Abraham must have been when God commanded him to offer Isaac, his son, his only son, as a human sacrifice. Remember Esther when she becomes queen and her uncle Mordecai ends up being given the king's signet ring and dressed in royal robes, while his antagonist Haman ends up being hung on the gallows that he built to execute Mordecai. And then there's Paul, who was there holding the coats of those Jews who were stoning the first Christian, Stephen, who was martyred. And then imagine Paul repeatedly persecuted himself as he was converted on the road to Damascus and became a Christian. And when he was on that road to Damascus, he was actually on his way to persecute more Christians. Some things are a bit obscure and lesser known examples. For instance, Ehud was a man with a withered right hand, was sent to kill an evil king, Eglon, and deliver Israel from the oppressive rule of the Moabites. And there was God when he gave the Amorites over to the Israelites. And then he stopped time and at Joshua's request so that the battle could be won at the end of the day. And there is also God who bound the prophet Ezekiel with ropes and instructed him to lie on his left side for 390 days and then lay on his right side for 40 days. And during that time, God initially instructs Ezekiel that he cannot eat anything except bread that was cooked over a human dung that was dried out and became the fire for cooking the bread. Now we have the advantage that we can view these things through the lens of hindsight. And we can see the spiritual implications there and what God was accomplishing because he gives us those clues and tells us in the text. But can you imagine being in that moment, facing those unexplainable happenings head on? Well, God truly does work in mysterious ways. Of course, the most mysterious and unpredictable thing that God has done in his plan is to save fallen man by sending his beloved Son into this world through a teenage virgin and then allowing him to suffer a horrible death on the cross of Calvary. That, you see, is the message of the Gospels. And there are verses also that state the mysterious nature of God's workings and his plans. Romans 11:33 through 34 says, "Oh, the depth of the riches both of the wisdom and knowledge of God! How unsearchable are his judgments, and his ways past finding out. For who knoweth the mind of the Lord, or who hath been his counselor?" And Job 11, verses 7 through 9. Job says, "Canst thou by searching find out God? Canst thou find out the Almighty unto perfection? It is as high as heaven. What canst thou do? It is deeper than hell. What canst thou know? The measure thereof is longer than the earth and is broader than the sea." And in 1 Corinthians 2:11 it says, For man knoweth the things of God, save the spirit of man which is in him. But even so, the things of God knoweth no man but the Spirit of God. You know, something is mysterious when it is not understood or when it isn't known about. It's certainly fitting to describe much of life as mysterious. Mysteries lie all around us. I found 27 synonyms for mysterious: strange, unknown, puzzling, secret, hidden, weird, baffling, perplexing, cryptic, unfathomable. That's only a few of them. And for every mystery we find out, it seems like there are a multitude of mysteries to replace it. Remember when Job asked God to explain the mystery of why all these bad things had happened to him. But when he asked God, God turned the matter around and told Job that before he would answer his question, he had a few questions for Job. Job had some questions to answer before God. Well, 4 chapters later in that book, chapters 38 through 41, over 80 questions are asked by God of Job, and he couldn't answer one of them. And Job finally says, "Okay, God, I know you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. You ask, Who is that obscures my path without knowledge? That's what you said to me. You said, you're asking me, like, you think I don't know the answers? Like, you think I don't know I have a plan? He says, here, you're asking me. And Job says, surely I spoke of things that I did not understand. Have you ever tried to explain to God why the things that are happening shouldn't be happening? Or they should happen a different way? And Job said, that's what I was doing. Things too wonderful, too marvelous, too far beyond my understanding for me to know. And then Job says, and then God, you said to me, listen now, and I will speak, and I will question you, and you shall answer me. And Job says, God, my ears are now open, and I heard you. And it says, and if that isn't enough, now my eyes have seen you. My eyes are opened up. My ears are opened up. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Thinking to myself, Job says, I'm thinking to myself, why did I ever question God? The way God works is mysterious to us, but it isn't to him. What he does is part of a flawless plan, unknowable and understandable to us because of our limited understanding. His plans and methods are beyond anything that we can comprehend, appearing to unfold in unexpected and sometimes seemingly illogical ways. But eventually, we can't fully grasp the bigger picture behind what God is doing. There are reasons why God's work is considerably mysterious. That's because it's beyond human capacity. God is often described as omnipotent. That means he has all power. Omniscient. That means he knows everything. He's also omnipresent, which means he's everywhere. He has unlimited power, unlimited knowledge, which is beyond our ability to even begin to comprehend. There are unforeseen circumstances. Sometimes events in life seem negative or challenging. And they can ultimately lead, though, to positive results. You know, God takes all things and works them together for what? Good. Making it appear as though God is working in mysterious ways because we don't understand them. So we have to walk by faith, meaning trusting in God's plan even when we don't fully understand it. God's ways are mysterious to us, not because he's trying to hide something from us, but because our limited human understanding lacks that capacity to grasp the full scope of his sovereignty. God's ways are not only higher than our ways, but remember this, if you don't remember anything else about this sermon. God's ways are not only higher than ours, but they are also better than ours. The big struggle we have is whether or not we'll embrace God's way, his plan. This is a blessing and a hope that comes from embracing God's ways. The good news is the blessing comes even when we don't understand what God is doing. The story of the song, God Moves in Mysterious Ways, is also an example of the way that God works. One stormy night in 1763, William Cowper, famous English poet, tried to drown himself in the River Thames. But when he noticed a strange man observing him, he returned home in search of more private means to end his life. Well, in the end, all three of Cowper's suicide attempts that night were thwarted by what he later described as an invisible hand. He suffered from mental illness most of his life. Cowper entered an asylum for treatment, and there he found God through the loving and Christ-like care of Dr. Nathaniel Cotton. And he found it through the Bible. 2 years after leaving the hospital, Cowper moved to Olney, England, and he met a man named John Newton, the author of that famous song, Amazing Grace. Had been a slave trader, but he became a disciple of Jesus Christ. Newton ministered to Cowper and encouraged him to use his gift of words for evangelistic purposes. And in 1771, Wilbur Cowper wrote that famous poem that I mentioned earlier, Light Shining Out of Darkness, which was later changed into a song. The first line of that hymn is where we get that phrase, God works in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. Now, Cowper continued to suffer from depression throughout his lifetime. And the timeless truth that God gave him during his lowest moments is still repeated 250 years later in the words of that song. The Old Testament prophet Isaiah gives us a great pathway to deal with the mysteries that life presents as he speaks to God's people, and he says this: the 70-year Babylonian exile of the Jews was no doubt a confusing time. And the prophet Isaiah encouraged them to, first of all, seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. So seek the Lord first. Secondly, remember what God has said. My thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways. Thirdly, know that God never sends forth his word, his will, without it accomplishing its purpose. In verse 11 of this chapter 55 in Isaiah says, so shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper the thing whereunto I send it. That's God's word to you and to me. It is sent to us. Fourthly, wherever his will is, the outcome will be, according to verse 12 of this 55th chapter, he shall go out with joy and shall be led out with peace. Oh, to have the joy and the peace of God even in the midst of a trial. Verse 12 says, for ye shall go out with joy and be led forth with peace. The mountains and the hills shall break forth before you into singing, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. I can't wait to see that type of thing happen when the Lord comes. You know, even the mountains rejoicing, the trees clapping their hands. So if you're in a situation you don't understand, would you trust God that he is accomplishing his will in your life? And rest in his joy and his peace, because it will come upon you. The outcome will be sure, even when the present circumstance is a mystery.